This is Father Gregory Pine.
This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Boom. Father Joseph Anthony.
Get it.
We're just living our best lives, or something approaching our best lives. Truth be told, we're actually living the only lives that we have to live, and I think by definition that makes them the best.
Yeah, totally.
But the best life feels especially best, better, good,
Bestest.
ratcheting down. Yep, bestest is.
Yeah.
At the end of summer, at the height of one's leisurely experience of this great American republic and all of the abundant fruits of this free land.
Yeah.
So thoughts on this summer? Was it good? Was it bad? By comparison to others in itself, apostolic ventures, good reads, anything stick out to you?
Yeah, summer always has its unique flavor. Doing campus ministry, it was like, oh my gosh, isn't it nice to have a summer and break down? It's like, listen, I don't stop working, okay? Like, there's no downtime. Like, what are you doing with yourself now that the students are gone? It's like, there's always so much more. This summer, though, this summer had a unique flavor to it. It's like a special, it's summer when like Chick-fil-A's peach milkshake comes out.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yep.
This was like a unique flavor of the peach milkshake, because I get my peaches down in Georgia. But anyway, I had a lot of weddings to do this summer. So many weddings. There was one period of the year where I had 3 weddings in 2 weekends. I went from Charlottesville on a Friday wedding to Columbus, Ohio for a Saturday wedding. And then like 72 hours after the return of that, flew out to Nebraska to do a Nebraska wedding. And then it's just like weddings popping off all over the place, which is great. I love doing campus ministry because these idiots just keep falling in love and they just keep wanting to start good, holy families and follow the Lord in the vocation of marriage. So it's a unique gift and privilege that I get to celebrate these weddings, because I remember the moment where like the guy like sat in my office was like, I think I'm going to ask her out. Yeah, I think I'm going to do it. And now I see her walking down the aisle with her father at their wedding. Like, those are really, really cool moments. But if I could characterize this summer for me and what it looked like, it was a wedding heavy summer. It was just, it was super beautiful though. And very happy to be a part of every single one of those weddings. So thank you to all those couples for allowing me the privilege to see your relationship grow and to be able to be there at those really, really important moments, and also to be able to shake my tail feather out on that dance floor at those receptions, because you got to cut a rug.
Wow. Yeah, I suppose when we entered, I lamented the fact that the real subtlety and nuance of our many dance moves would be lost or obscured by the folds of the habit. But I feel like you've really taken it in stride.
I definitely have, yeah.
And you've managed to improvise and to use the advantages of the habit, in fact, to make more pronounced the excellence of your dancing vibes. So I salute you.
Thank you.
Let's see. For me, this summer was, what would I say, a whirlwind? No, that's too mainstream. I will call it, what's the opposite? Well, it's like a dumpster fire, but what's burning in the dumpster is like glitter and unicorn fuel.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Okay.
So instead of it being trash, it's like glitter and unicorn fuel.
Oh,
yeah, so it's a glitter unicorn fire in a dumpster. That doesn't have the same ring to it.
Yeah.
But it was a great summer. It was an intense summer, okay? So it was like dialed up to 11 and set on fire. But I managed to see a bunch of wonderful people and then do a handful of really cool things. So we had the Camino. Well, before that, I did a little pilgrimage in the footsteps of St. Dominic with my sister and a friend, which was awesome to see places where St. Dominic was.
Love that.
And began the order, and like where he was born, basically where he founded the order, and then some of the first places to which he sent the brethren, which was awesome. And then we did the Camino, Father Jacob Bertrand and I, in a group of 15, and then I was in Berlin for a month learning German, which at face value I was like, this language is kind of brutal. It's like English with a cricket bat. But as I was there, the longer and longer I was there, I was like, man, this thing is awesome. This is such a sweet language. So I grew very sympathetic to it. Unfortunately, sympathetic and competent are not the same. That's okay.
Yeah, if only they were, it would have been great.
And then I came back to the United States to do a little whirlwindy tour, mostly, some Godsplaining retreats,
yes,
and then visit with my family, visit with the community in Washington, D.C., and then bop here and there to spend some time with some friends, which was awesome. So my heart is full. which reminds me of whatever that Adam Sandler movie was. Was it Mr. Deeds? Not important.
No.
Not important. No. Because the real thing about summer is that for a lot of us, we get like glutted on leisure, and then we begin to feel like kind of slow and lazy, and then we got to get back into gear. So we figured it would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about sloth or sloth. There's some debate.
Sloth.
Yeah, exactly. There's some debate as to the proper pronunciation of this word. We will not engage in that debate. We'll just alternate pronunciations.
I was going to say, we're not going to commit to either one of these, by the way. Like, we're just going to keep everybody on their toes.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So we think it's sloth because that's what most people say. But occasionally, when you're at a Godsplaining retreat, not to mention which one, it may have been the first.
It definitely was the first.
Yeah, it was the first.
It was
I
the first.
did say.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, I said it.
Yeah.
There was some confusion, and we remain confused. But irrespective. Let's set the stage. All right. In that setting, we talked a little bit about the capital sins. What do we need to know about, basic setup for like sin, vice, why are these things important, what about them is especially troubling? Get us started.
Yeah, the whole kind of drawing from that retreat, right? We were talking about like, okay, how do we lose our faith? Like not as a tutorial on like, hey, here's the handbook on what to do, but like let's talk about the enemies to the faith. And we like zeroed in on these capital vices, talking about their it doesn't really come up too much, but I think they have a privileged position in the spiritual life of being horribly destructive to our faith. And we see that throughout the entirety of the Christian tradition, going all the way back to the Desert Fathers, who were the first ones to really kind of enumerate them in this way. And they include sloth as being that. And so setting that kind of tone as like, okay, this isn't just kind of something that is like problematic because we're not efficient or productive or things, but like it is horribly destructive to our faith, our relationship with Jesus, and living in union with him. And I think sometimes we think of specifically sloth as somebody who doesn't like reach their potential, but not realizing that this is active destruction of our union with Jesus. And so, coming out of that retreat, you I think did a really good job of presenting sloth in this way. And I'm happy that we can jump into this, the two of us, because you're going to be working, I think, from more of the theoretical and foundational aspects of it. I, on the other hand, will probably be working for more of the experiential. I am an expert in the slothless areas.
He says after having celebrated 11 weddings in the course of 14 days.
Yeah. So I think it'll be fun to kind of like then dive into this in a little deeper of a way.
Yeah. So in that retreat, Father Jacob Bertrand set the stage by giving a little bit of a summary of the Desert Fathers and then the medieval reception of the Desert Fathers on this theme. Mm-hmm. So basically you have in the 5th century like a Vagrius Ponticus, or a Vagrius Pontus, St. John Cassian, who kind of formulate that data, and they use it as a way to say, hey, Christian, be vigilant.
Yeah.
Because there are these vices that come under cover of darkness. And what they do is they pervert the love at work in our lives. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they might, like inflame certain lower loves, or they might, kind of rein in certain higher loves, or they might kind of put other loves to sleep or put them in a dormant state. So you need to be cognizant of the loves that God has poured into our heart so that we can kind of cultivate those in an orderly fashion. And so St. John Cassian likens them to the 7 tribes that surround the Israelites in the region of Canaan, and then adds pride as the mother of all capital vices, which he likens to Egypt as that
straight up
exactly destructive of imperial forces. And then we talked a little bit about the way that it's kind of codified by St. Gregory of the Great and then received by St. Thomas Aquinas. And the basic idea is that a capital vice gives rise to other vices. Mm-hmm. So they're like kind of principles in the vicious life. Insofar as if you welcome, certain capital vices, and we name them pride, envy, anger, sloth, avarice, gluttony, and lust. If you kind of welcome them into your life, whether deliberately and intentionally or otherwise, then they often give rise to other vices, which give rise to other sins. So it's the sense that, like, as a Christian, we want to be vigilant. We want to be on the lookout for how sin might creep in or crop up, so that way we can address it, which is to say, okay, God is giving me the grace to confront this, and that grace is fruitful. I believe in it. I hope in it. I love it. All right, so, like, what does it look like? So maybe, just thinking practically about the sin of sloth, what are ways, like in your conversations with your students, in your conversations with other people more broadly, what are ways in which sloth kind of creeps into our life, or what are the guises that sloth wears when it's on the move?
Well, I think it's super important too to realize as we talk about the capital vice of sloth, it's a little different than how it's referred to kind of colloquially in our contemporary culture. I think people just see it as laziness. I had a lazy day. I was super slothful. That's not actually what we're talking about. That's an aspect, and that definitely is in play with sloth. But when we're talking about the capital vice of sloth, it's a weariness of soul, right? It's a sadness or this weird spiritual weariness that takes place. And so it's important to realize that, that may manifest in a certain type of laziness in that way, but it actually goes much, much deeper. And that's why I keep saying it's a little more destructive. You talked about there's some of the capital vices as they kind of push things dormant or rein things in. I think sloth is one of those that it seems like it's just like super beige and has lost all color, maybe slips into grayscale. And I don't think it's like, I think it's the difference between somebody seeing the beauty of a flower garden, and all its different flowers and colors and types of flowers and all that. You may have somebody that is, let's say, colorblind. They can see that, but they've lost the kind of sense of its like total grandeur. And I think for a lot of people, they think of sloth as doing that, like still allowing things to be there, but it's just kind of lost its color. I think it's a little more destructive. I think it's where you end up totally blind. You've lost all sense of reality to that. And that's something else that came up during this retreat, but is super important to realize that all of these capital vices actually distort or maybe force us to not interact with reality in its proper context. And so sloth does that. It manipulates and actually separates us from reality in many ways, because it's not just this inactivity of laziness, but it's true weariness of the spirit and of the soul to do what? To attain perfection in union with Christ, to endure and maybe pursue conversion with Jesus on a daily basis in that way.
Yeah, I think... Yeah, when we were describing it and we were chatting it through in the question and answer session, sloth is when the soul regards God, his divine good, and says, it's just too lofty. It's just too far off. And so I grow weary, like you said, or I grow sad at the thought that I am in fact called to this vocation.
Yeah.
And rather than endeavor it, right, I will just despair of it. I'll kind of consign myself to whatever, second tier, second place, or even something less.
Yeah.
Because that gap just seems unbridgeable, right? Like I'm exhausted thinking at the prospect of how, great are the promises of God. So it's almost more simple, more straightforward for me to simply say, can't possibly be the case. If not in the theoretical, certainly in the practical realm, right? Because I'm just way too well acquainted with my own weakness, with my own woundedness. And I can't see a way through. I can't see a way out. So rather than open myself up to the idea, the prospect that I might be called to something so wonderful, I'm just going to close that door, because it hurts to open myself up to that, right? Because I have to make myself vulnerable to the call and the promise of God, which is terrible, right?
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying, yeah. And so rather than do that, I'll settle for the scraps that fall from the table, right? Because it seems like what they're serving at this banquet might be too good to be true. So yeah, maybe like addressing that person, who hears these spiritual things described in such glowing terms and doesn't believe that those promises could possibly be for him or her. Okay, what are some ways in which we can seek to address sloth? The title of this particular episode is Sloth and Spiritual Motivation, which sounds a little bit self-helpy, but like the thing that ultimately motivates us is God, his Christ, the grace that he pours into our hearts in the sacramental dispensation. So maybe, just from your experience again, from your conversations, thoughts along these lines,
Well, the first thing is to always make sure that you are inviting Christ and inviting God into that moment. When we deal with sloth or we deal with this kind of weariness of soul, a lot of this comes from you pointed out, you like see the glories and the grandeur of God and what he's calling you to, and you're like, yeah, that sounds great, but I'm not there. I'm here. I can't get there. So why do I even begin? And in some respects, like, this is where the evil one manipulates and lies. And in some senses, that's right. You can't get there by your own. This isn't your work. This is God's work. This is his initiative. This is his desire, which means he's going to accomplish it. And so I think in those moments where you may be, laying in your bed with your, 15-pound weighted blanket on you, watching the 17th episode of Netflix or whatever it is, in that moment, just invite God to begin the work right then and there, because this is his work. And to allow him to have that kind of place in your life, and whenever you experience that kind of void or that distance from the Lord, it's not necessarily up to you to recover ground and to make up the lost. No, just invite the Lord into that moment and then begin progressing alongside of him, in union with him, following his lead. But I think there are times that we see at a distance where and this is one of those lies that I see happen a lot in the confessional, and it manifests in like subtle ways, but people think, they should be where they once were when their devotions were super high, or they think where they should be, and they want to get there as quickly as possible, instead of saying, well, I got to begin from here. And so they feel this like pressure that they have to make up ground to go back to where they once were, because they fell out of favor with their faith, or they fell out of favor with the practices of their faith. So they have to recover and go back as quickly as possible. So I'm going to do all of these things. And it's like, no. You just got to begin right where you are, right there, because this is the Lord's work, right? So the motivation in so much of the spiritual life is actually super simple, but also extremely complex. But it's just to begin right where you are, inviting the Lord into that moment.
Yeah, I think that we certainly highlighted throughout the course of the weekend, as a response to the perennial temptation, or the perennial threat of these capital vices, the discipline and habit of prayer. We didn't reinvent the Christian life. We just reproposed it unto ages of ages. But I think here there's an especial importance to prayer, because why? Well, prayer is, says St. John Damascene, the raising of one's mind, heart to God. It is the simple gaze of the soul upon the God by whom she knows herself to be loved, says St. Teresa of Avila. But in order to pray, you have to pause, right?
Yeah.
And I think that paradoxically, we often see sloth in the form of feverish activity.
Yes.
So, like you mentioned, a lot of people are super concerned about the fact that they're falling behind in the spiritual life, or they're not yet where they ought to be in the spiritual life. So they're doing. And many of us have come up, or, we've had contact with folks who are involved in ecclesial ministries, but who are gripped by a quiet despair. It's almost as if they're engaged in those ministries because they suspect that God cannot change the world. And so they're doing everything that lies within their power to bring about that change which they hope to realize. But truth be told, that's not Christian ministry. That's nihilistic ministry, as it were. And so I think when we take a stance, and look critically at our activity and say, what informs this activity? What inspires this activity? Why have I decided to go about this activity? It has to be the Lord's work, or it's nothing. It's like it's the Lord who gives the growth when the laborers sleep, right? And apart from it, it availeth not. And so I think that sloth, you're regarding the divine good. It looks too high. It looks too exalted. You despair of it as a reality or as a possibility for you, and you content yourself with, kind of living at the bottom of the proverbial barrel. But what we want is to reanimate our hope in that exalted divine good, because it is in fact for us, because God's promises are true, and because they are for me. All right. And if that's the case, I need to tap into those promises with a contemplative life, or I need to tap into those promises by simple steps in prayer. So, I don't know, your thoughts on combating.
I don't want us to continue any further in this episode without addressing what you just said there, is that this feverish activity, this overemphasis on productivity in our life, is also sloth. It is two sides of the same coin. This is also the same kind of spiritual weariness that is placed, or that is present when we see it in manifesting as quote unquote laziness. Like, these are two sides of the same coin. They're the two extremes, but it's dealing with the same capital vice, because in this overactivity, in this overproductivity, right, we are not availing ourselves of the true glories of the Lord that he has invited us into, right? It is this kind of mechanistic force, because we feel like we have to accomplish this. And it's the same type of kind of self-indulgent, navel-gazing, selfish attitude. We've taken our eyes off of the Lord now and forced them upon ourselves, because now we have to accomplish all of these things. I'm not content and I'm not happy with my own goodness or my own, humanity. So I'm going to try to force myself to believe it by this overactivity. And I'm going to work hard for all these accolades or all these accomplishments and things, because they're going to convince me of my worth and my goodness, instead of being able to receive that from the Father himself. So this is why sloth is so destructive. The book, The Noonday Devil, which I forget the author right now, it's some Benedictine, I'm pretty sure, but talks about that. He has an entire chapter on the temptations to sloth via activity. And how important that is. I mean, when we can talk about the antidote, I think many times the antidote to real sloth is not activity, is actual proper leisure. Rest, leisure that is recreative of the human person, that remotivates, re-energizes, and allows us to have that breath of fresh air in our humanity and union with God, who was creator, in those aspects. So doing things that are appropriately leisurely, which means we have to pause sometimes and create space for that. We could talk about clutter. Physical clutter is a whole thing. Maria Kondo, thank you so much. Does this spark joy? But is there spiritual clutter in your life? And that's really important, because we have to create a space for proper leisure. And sometimes that's why people have their scrapbooking room. That's their space for leisure, But do you have a scrapbooking room in your soul? Like, do you have a space that you can rest with the Lord? And there's a lot of spiritual clutter out there too, because we're forcing these things and trying to rely on the activity to convince ourselves that we have a relationship with the Lord, instead of just sitting in front of him and being with him.
Yeah, I like this image a lot of spiritual clutter, because I know that there are a lot of people stress clean, and you've got a big,
true.
task.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And you need to address that task, and you probably need to do it pronto, but instead you're vacuuming your carpet for the first time in 2.5 months with all kinds of assiduity, and it's like, what's going on here? But
is everything okay, buddy?
Yeah, exactly.
Good?
I think that when your workspace is cluttered, it's really difficult to get the work done, because things aren't at right angles. I can be so I was looking at the things that I set down on the vanity this morning, right? So I have my toothpaste here and my toothbrush here, and then my floss wands here, and then my shaving cream here, and then and I looked at it and I was like, somebody's got a problem, right? But that's what I need in order to get ready in the morning. If things aren't at right angles, I'm just going to lose my mind and nick myself even more than I already do at the age of 34.
You do a lot, yeah.
Woof. All right, but I think that's a great point. So maybe then we can just think about some of the spiritual clutter which distracts us from the divine good, and taking those small steps as we grow towards it. One of them I would say is a kind of spirit of measuring ourselves against false standards. Okay, whether that be a notion of our own holiness which isn't in fact true, or someone else's holiness which may be real or imagined, but it's we're taking our cues from something other than the call and grace of God in our lives. So let's talk a little bit about that. What's true, what's not true, how do we move?
Absolutely. We have to remind ourselves that we are not the criteria. We can't gauge ourselves according to our own kind of measuring stick, and also what we see in others. This is about a deep interior union with the Lord. For a few people, it was a physical union, and those received the stigmata, but many do not. So there's an interior union, and that is something that we have a hard time gauging or measuring, because we're human beings. We can only see the exterior. We see with the eyes of men. God sees to the heart. So to allow ourselves to be reminded of the fact that what is the measuring stick? Well, it's the Lord's invitation to me, and it's the Lord who then allows me to have the ability to grow, but also sets forth the points of growth in my life. So yeah, we live a spirit of comparison so much, and those are 1,000 different other reasons, which means that's 157 other different episodes that we can record. But yeah, allowing ourselves to kind of check the comparison. And I think often a really good thing that we can do to check comparison is to allow ourselves to rejoice in another's goodness. So maybe we're not comfortable with that. That's not a very comfortable conversation that happens a lot of times between colleagues, associates, and sadly among friends. You know, say like, "What's good? Like, tell me good. I want to rejoice with you. I want to celebrate with you. In the last 14 days, tell me the good." You know, so allowing ourselves to initiate that kind of conversation so that we can rejoice in another's goodness, but not be weary about it, and then also be motivated to not set our own standards.
Yeah, I think that. So this came up in the episode about, or will come up in the episode about envy and comparison.
Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah.
And so it's like envy and sloth have a lot to do with each other insofar as envy sees the good of another and grows, sad and weary because it represents a kind of threat to my own goodness. It seems like goodness is a limited commodity, and if somebody else has more of it, I have less of it. Oh, woe is me. And then with sloth, you regard the divine good and you grow sad and weary on account of the fact that it seems so distant. But there's a similar movement there.
Right.
And in both cases, there's a spirit of comparison. And so I think that like one way in which to address it is, as you described, to grow more cognizant of, to grow more appreciative of the good, both in the life of the other,
right,
which directly addresses envy, and in the life of your own self. Your own identity and mission has to originate with this recognition that the Lord is about a good work in me, but it's a good that's particular and peculiar to me. Okay, so it's not His good, it's not her good, it's in fact my good. And in order to recognize that, I need to listen to the testimony of my friends who might be, offering modest affirmations here and there. It's like, you're really talented at this. Like, you have a gift for administration, you have a gift for hospitality, or whatever it is. But also, like, in the context of the life of prayer, sacraments, I'm gaining a deeper appreciation as the Lord heals me and grows me as to who I am and what I'm for. And I occupy a particular place within the body of Christ, right? It's not, if I'm the eye, I'm not the shoulder, right? I'm not the haunch, whatever.
I'm the armpit.
Exactly. There it is. Bingo. I could, whatever. Here we go. So, no, you smell better. So, so we need to grow cognizant. We need to grow recollected in the fact of our being called to a particular and peculiar life, and to rejoice in that because it's got a unique, an unrepeatable dignity. But if we're constantly looking around at the vocations of others and wishing that it were otherwise, then we miss out on the one beautiful life that God is in fact giving to us, which beautiful life is already shot towards the divine good, right? And it's for us to kind of, vibe with that, jive with that, embrace that, as it were.
But as we were talking about, like, let's then allow ourselves to set our sights on the glories of God, and how He then this is the earth-shattering reality of the incarnation. There was a divide that could not be bridged by us, and so when we looked at God, He was too far away, and He jumped the divide to take on our humanity so that we wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. And so that this sloth was actually then truly eradicated. It should have been eradicated from our lexicon then, because when we saw the glories of God and said, I can't attain to that. Well, in the incarnation, now it is possible. And we can attain it in this life now as a preparation and a foreshadow and an entrance into the next life. So I think that it is so important to allow ourselves to pursue and make those invitations to the incarnate Lord in many respects. And this is why, if we want to talk about clearing out spiritual clutter and creating space, which I do want to talk about that because that's what I do, but creating Marie Kondo your soul, okay? Just like create that space. But what's the one thing that should be there? Like, if you can sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament and open up the Gospels and read His life and let the promises of the lips of Jesus Christ, His words, let those promises just reverberate through your heart. And that's what's going to engender the hope that, this is a future attainable, arduous good, but it's His work that He's calling me to. And that's going to give you the motivation that when you then go out into this world, that's going to then try to reclutter you down which should be like a new R&B song where you clutter you down. But as you go out into the world, you're going to have that motivation to continue and not have that weariness when you look at the glories of God, because you're like, no, he said these promises and invited me to this.
Yeah. Boom. I mean, Marie Kondo and the promises of God. I feel like those are our two principal takeaway points from this episode.
Yeah.
I guess, by way of parting thought, by way of summation, there's a temptation to think can't possibly be, or way too glorious, and then to shy away from or to draw back from on account of the fact that it seems almost like an accusation or a condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if God is calling me to that, then he ought to be more concretely generous, because I certainly don't feel that way. But I think, one of these takeaway points is just to embrace the simple means that God has already given to us. We've talked about prayer, we've talked about sacraments. I think especially the sacrament of confession is huge, insofar as it's not just a reset button, it's a source of ongoing healing and strengthening. And as we avail ourselves of that, we grow in the virtue of penitence, which is able to establish continuity between past, present, and future, and give us a sense for this, the fact that we're shot towards God, and his mercy conducts us hence. And then like friendship, like you talked about recognizing the good in your friend. Your friend also recognizes the good in you, calls it, names it, right? But also coaxes it forth, or like calls it forth, coaxes it out. And that helps us to thrill at the recognition of it, and then to set that in motion. Like simple study of the faith, when you learn things about God, it motivates you, it animates you, all kinds of stuff. I mean, we're coming to the end, but any final thoughts, final takeaway points, summary?
Yeah. Don't be a slothful idiot.
Second use of idiot. I held up 3 fingers.
No, and just because of the lack of motivation, because like that is actually extremely rampant in our society and life. Like, don't. I'd encourage our listeners to just like don't get surprised by it, and don't let it be as catastrophic. It's important that sloth is very destructive in our life, but it need not be catastrophic. And that in those moments that you recognize what's happening, or you see the glory of the Lord, and you're like, I'm sure he has that envision for somebody, but I bet it's not me. That is a lie. And then just to invite him into those moments and begin from there. Begin from exactly where you are. And that is the process of repeated conversion. And that's just a tried and true method throughout the Gospels and the entire Christian tradition.
Boom. There it is. So for listeners, asterisk at the bottom of the episode, the word idiot was used analogically. In the first sense, it meant child of God between the ages of 18 and 22. In the second sense, it meant child of God who is not cognizant of the fact that he or she is a child of God. So
thank you.
That's a little guide there for you doing the work of translation. So thanks so much for listening to this episode of Godsplaining. As always, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Like the episode. If you would, subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast app and leave a 5-star review, all of which help get the word out. And please God, change hearts. Boom. If you'd like to donate to the podcast through Patreon, you can follow the link in the show notes or the description. And then in the same show notes or description, you'll find links to check out Godsplaining merchandise and to get updates on upcoming events. So that's it. Our prayers are for you. Please pray for us. And we'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Godsplaining.